Hello, welcome to the Voter Education Coalition and WOW 6 Lawrence City Commission Primary Election Forum. I'm 6 News anchor Stephanie Bryant and your moderator for this evening. The Voter Education Coalition is a nonpartisan organization that sponsors candidate forums, meet and greets, and other events to educate citizens about candidates and their policies. Now, you can learn more about the VEC and the events by visiting their Facebook page at facebook.com/VECDGKS or the VEC website at www.votereducationcoalition.org. WOW 6 will be showing a replay of this forum several times over the next few weeks. It will also be available anytime on 6lawrence.com. We would like to thank the City of Lawrence and their staff for the use of their facility and all their help of making this event possible. The rules for the forum are very simple. I will be asking questions, and each question will have a designated response time. Candidates will answer questions at the podium. At the end of this period, you'll hear a bell, and we'll move on to the next candidate or the question. Now, the next candidate should be ready to take the podium as soon as the person before them is done answering. We will rotate the order of responses between each candidate. There will be no rebuttals and no questions from the candidates. We'll start with opening statements from each of the candidates, and with that, we'll start with Jeremy Ryan Pierce.
Thank you for having me. I'm Jeremy Ryan Pierce. I'm running for State House District 45. I'm running on a platform of preserving Second Amendment rights, preserving the rights of the unborn, preserving personal privacy rights, and now helping to defend education. I thank you so much for your time tonight, and I look forward to a good dialogue.
All right, thank you, Jeremy. And I might want to add to that, each candidate will have 60 seconds for their opening statement. And with that, we'll move on forward to Representative Tom Sloan.
Okay, I guess the microphone is not working. If re-elected, I will continue working on funding education at all levels, from pre-kindergarten through KU. I will continue my work to protect the state's drinking water supplies, to increase the amount of renewable energy that's generated here, and most of it we need to export to states with larger populations. And maybe most importantly, I'll continue working for responsible tax policies where equity and fairness matter, where everyone pays their fair share. And as many of you here today and those who view this later know, I have brought federal agency heads to Kansas in order to have them learn about what we need, what our ideas are for federal and state partnerships. I would continue to work in those areas.
All right. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Jim Carlskent.
Hi, my name is Jim Carlskent. I'm running in the 42nd District House Representative against incumbent Connie O'Brien. I'm a lifelong Kansan. I grew up on a dairy farm in Fort Scott, Kansas. I served in Vietnam, was awarded the Bronze Star. I have been in Catholic and public education for my entire career. My last service in the public school was a superintendent of schools in Holton, Kansas. I'm pro-life and I support the Second Amendment. I'm a fiscally conservative Republican. My reason for running is I'm appalled at the direction that our state is going. Our state is in a financial crisis due to the irresponsible experimentation of the tax experiments that have taken place in the Brownback administration. We do not have a balanced budget. We're experiencing the largest tax increases in the history of Kansas. We're borrowing money, and we're taking money from transportation that they do not have, and we're not spending it on roads. We're plugging holes in the Kansas budget. We're not paying our debts, and our credit rating has been downgraded.
Next, we'll move to Stephen Davis.
Hello, my name is Stephen Davis. I'm running in the Democratic primary in the 44th District. I am a lifelong Kansan as well. I grew up in Leavenworth, Kansas, and I moved to Lawrence a few years ago. I'd like to thank the Voter Education Coalition and Channel 6 for putting this on. I think this is an excellent public service they do every 2 years. My chief concern with government, and I'm very concerned with Kansas government right now, is that it be accessible, accountable, and transparent. One of the biggest concerns with government reform is that other issues always get caught up in the crossfire. There was no floor vote on Medicaid expansion, despite the fact that growing bipartisan coalition wants that to happen. And in the next year, I believe that with appropriate protections from unscrupulous behavior, we will see improvement on the ability to get floor votes on these issues.
All right, thank you. And lastly, we'll hear from Representative Barbara Ballard.
I am Barbara Ballard, and I'm the state representative in the 44th District. We came to Lawrence in 1980. I've been at the University of Kansas for all that time. Our son attended grade school here. He attended high school here. He attended the University of Kansas, and he finished the University of Kansas Medical School. So everything we've done so far has just been Kansas. I would simply say to you that I've been on the school board for 8 years. I was elected for 2 terms and served as president in both of those terms. Issues that I'm really concerned about is really making sure that we keep the funding at the university, since we're losing a lot of it. K through 12, having served on the school board for those 8 years, it's not a hearsay. I know what has to happen with schools. Also, I would look at tax relief for all Kansans to see that they're treated fairly as far as our taxes are concerned. And that's part of our deficit, is because we're not collecting all the taxes we should be. So I would simply say, looking at working for excellence in public schools and universities, tax fairness.
With that, we'll start the forum. And I will be, after each question I read, I'll let you know how much time you have. So with that, we'll start with our first question, and we'll start this off with you, Mr. Sloan. What is your opinion of the legislature's 2017 solution for funding K through 12 education? Do you believe the current level of funding for K through 12 education is sufficient? You get 90 seconds.
Thank you. And no, I do not believe that the appropriation for K through 12 or any of our educational levels is adequate. I expect that the Supreme Court is going to rule sometime probably in December that the school aid needs to be increased. You cannot count the state's contribution to employee retirement, the CAPERS contribution, as part of school aid and have it be a meaningful classroom input, if you will, to improving educational outcomes. But I will also say that the equity issue was not a small item that we had to deal with at the end of the session, in the special session. Fairness and equal educational opportunities across the state have to matter. It's not just how well the students can do in Lawrence or Baldwin City or Perry-LeCompton, but it is important that all of the students that would come to KU or want to come to KU or to a community college are prepared. And I expect that we will have to revisit the 2017 appropriation for K through 12 when we return in January.
Does anyone else like to respond? Yes.
Thank you. Regarding the education funding that took place in the 2017 and the wrap-up session or the emergency session that took place, the special session that the governor called, you know, there was the money was taken from other places to make the Supreme Court happy with respect to what was going to take place so schools could open, wouldn't close, you know, the 1st of July. The state did not have the money to do that. There was no real plan as far as, you know, how we get out of this mess. And like Mr. Sloan indicated, I think later in the year we'll see the Supreme Court act again. The state funding for education, Kansas ranks 29th per pupil in state funding across the states. The Brownback administration and my opponent want to tout the fact that they say we're second in the nation in funding. That's not the case. It's a money laundering game that is being played on aspects of what's going on. We are not second. The issue is we need to deal with the fact that we are not taking care of the schools the way we need to. We need to keep the courts out of the business of schools, but in doing so, we as the legislature have to work to fund the schools in a proper way. There's many different facets of what goes on in schools. Mr. Sloan indicated the capers, the other things that take place.
Representative Val. Oh,
Are we
just Mr. Davis.
going in order for everyone?
we'll start, I'll start the questioning with each of you candidates, and then you can respond accordingly.
Okay, thank you. No, I do compliment the sort of moderate majority in the Kansas legislature for patching up our budget this year to the tune of $38 million. Unfortunately, we're looking at a $548 million problem with sufficiency next year, and the Supreme Court will be ruling on that this fall. Which is a difference of about 15 times, and I don't believe that we will be able to keep shuffling money around. I think we need to address the revenue crisis, and that will be one of my first goals if elected.
Yep. I would add to that, people say, do we fund our schools in Kansas? Yes, we do. Over 50%, half of our budget is spent on education. Okay, take K through 12. And then if we add about 14% for higher education, about 65% is spent on education. 85% would be on social services. So when we look at that, it's not that we are not giving the majority of our money to schools. It's just that we are not able to spread it across the board. We're talking roughly, $4 billion. So when people say, yeah, it costs a lot of money, yes, it does. But we're not putting it where it needs to be, which is what you heard Representative Sloan say, the equalization part. The equity part was met. So we really have to look at how the rural schools, urban schools, and how they all connect. And we have to be able to, it says adequate education, suitable education. That means for all the students in 286 school districts.
Mr. Pierce.
For a lot of people who talk about equity and equality of education, the one solution that's ideal for all this is the one that's not on the table, and that's school vouchers. I believe that each student should have attached to the backpack a voucher with kind of like a dollar sign or a dollar amount of funding that goes with them, controlled by the parents, where they go, so the parents have a choice about what education their kids have. I believe that the system we have now unfairly creates an environment in which you have administrators who make 3 figures a year, and I think that's kind of unfair. I think that the only proper solution, if you're really talking about equity, is to give equal funding to every student and give the control to parents about where it goes. I don't think that's unreasonable, and I think that would actually give a fair and adequate education, because the parents would know what's right for their kids. And I don't understand why that's kind of an issue with Kansans, but I will tell you that if I am elected, that will be one of the things that I will be pushing relatively hard, because I believe that it's exactly the opposite of what it needs to be. What we have is a system that funds administrators rather than funding students and teachers.
All right. We'll go on to the next question, and we'll start this one off with Mr. Carlskent. Would you be willing to restore the tax cuts from 2012? If so, at what level? You each have 90 seconds to answer.
Regarding the tax cuts from 2012, I can't say that I would restore them fully. I think we need to look at them. We had the biggest tax increase in the history of Kansas with the sales tax increase because of the experimentation. When the tax cuts came into place, there was estimated 190,000 people would receive those. It ballooned to 330,000. I think we need to be sensible and take a real close look at fairness, at how, the equity involved. We are hurting with the sales tax, we're hurting some of the poorest Kansans. But at the same time, special interest groups and big money special interest groups are not paying their fair share. I think we need to look at it. Would I say fully go back to what it was in 2011? I can't say that. I think we need to see what the numbers would come out as.
Mr. Davis?
Yes, I do believe that we should reverse the Brownback tax cuts. I don't see any benefit gained and quite a bit of downsides from that. And we're having annual budget crises that are becoming monthly budget crises. And the issue is not cost. We cannot cut costs to the extent that they're discussing. We need to raise revenues. And so, yes, I would reverse those tax cuts.
Mrs. Ballard.
Yes, I would. I voted no when we voted for it on the House floor because it didn't make a lot of sense because you didn't identify any other source to replace that revenue that you were taking. So I would put us back to where we were prior to that. Now, we need an overhaul on our tax policies in this state. But right now, we can't do it, not when you have a huge deficit. But we need to be working on that in the process. But it is not fair for someone in a particular office, and I'll use attorneys as an example, their secretaries, their clerks, and everything else are paying full taxes, but they are not. And they don't feel really good about that, and they didn't ask for this tax policy. So I would change it to put it back to where it was, because we are losing over $260 million a year that we are not getting for all the other needs we have in this state. Now, after we get that under control, let's go back and look at all of our policies and what we can do about it to make it fair across the board.
Mr. Pierce.
I would not necessarily reverse the Brownback tax cuts per se, but I have evolved on certain issues since the last time I ran. I believe that the thing that we could explore better to make life fairer for everybody is actually a reduction in grocery taxes, because I think that would probably affect more people than the reversal of any of the Brownback tax cuts and Brownback solutions to taxing. I believe that if you're going to, that a 4% to 5% rate of grocery tax would be a good interim fee, but I think that if you really wanted to make life equitable, broadening the base is actually one of the best solutions out there. As far as the deficits are concerned, I think that might be a symptom of a government that is actually taking itself to a more private sector. The dollars have not left Kansas. The dollars are just in private hands. And I think that's a good place for them to be. I think that people actually should have more control over what they spend and over what solutions they have or what they do with their money. I think that an individual is wiser with its money than the government ever will be. So as far as the so-called tax deficits, that's just basically money that has never seen Kansas hands or Kansas government hands and is now in the hands of private citizens. So I kind of think that's a good thing.
Mr. Sloan.
Thank you. And I voted against the governor's proposed income tax reductions in 2012. I voted against the sales tax increase, again, because it was not going to be enough money to meet the needs of government, and it was not an equitable tax. I would vote to restore a tax on the 340,000 businesses that no longer pay taxes on pass-through income. And I would support restoring a third tier of income tax on the highest earning Kansans. I truly believe that those who benefit the most from our society have a responsibility to help those who are more challenged. And it's not just a revenue shortfall and that the public has the money and they can spend it as they wish and we benefit. If you've been following the media, you know that the federal government no longer pays Medicare expenses for people in Osawatomie State Mental Hospital because we have not maintained the building or the staffing. Senior citizens are having their home-based services cut because we don't have money. And the alternative is that they then move into adult care facilities, which cost the state more. We're not hiring and paying troopers to maintain public safety.
We'll go on to the next question. We'll start this one with Mr. Davis. How do you feel about borrowing from existing funds to cover projected budget deficits? You each have 90 seconds to answer.
I think of it as sort of the gambling addict economy. We keep sort of putting our money on the roulette wheel and hoping it comes out double zero when every month we're tens of millions of dollars off. In general, no, I believe that the services that we are paying for as a state are critical, and shuffling them around to meet today's needs at the expense of the future is a terrible idea. It will take 50 years to fix all of the Kansas roads at this rate. We've drawn so much out of the bank of KDOT at this point that it's the Department of Transportation practically lobbying against the government to prevent it from doing this. And just to cover short-term issues with long-term cuts, I don't approve of that, no.
I would agree. I have a real difficult time with that because a lot of the cuts that we're making are affecting people. I mean, people that are most vulnerable, people that need to have their money, they need to have their services. If you're only giving somebody 3 or 4 or 5 hours a week, and just to help them out, to take their medicines, to help them get a bath, to help them get dressed and everything else, and then you cut back on that. There's no place they can go when we continue to cut. So we borrow from transportation. We decide to divert the taxes. We decide not to pay the capers, and then we defer it until 2018, and we go on. Well, you know, at one point, that's robbing Peter to always pay Paul. Now, at some point, you've got to realize you can't do it that way. And yet, that's what we're doing because we're desperate for money. And when you're desperate for money, you do desperate things. And I think affecting people, that's one. You're trying to protect K through 12 because you had a court order. You're taking from higher education, and you're charging the higher rate for KU and K-State. Others get to pay a smaller amount, but you're doing it on the whole budget. So in other words, everybody is paying for something that we really wouldn't necessarily have to pay for if you had restored those cuts you took. That's over $260 million a year. So if you had at least put that money back there, and then you would not have to go and take more or take from fee funds or raid over here or raid over there to make it work. I understand how you work. If you need the money, you go where you want to. But it is affecting people to the point that we saw a hospital close.
Mr. Pierce.
I think that every single organization or every single division of the government should be funded at the level that it was agreed upon that it would be funded. I don't believe you should be able to raid any one organization's funds to fund any other organization. However, I believe that there are also more responsible things you can do within each organization to ensure that even at lower funding levels, you're giving the same level of service. I think it's unfair to use the term equity and everything within that context, because I don't believe that one person's equity is another person's equity within this. So whenever you're dealing with an organization like the transportation budget, that should never have been rated in the first place. What should have happened in that is the legislature should have actually had a lawsuit come up and should have defended its funding position rather than actually having to get itself forced into the position to raid the highway fund to fund education. I think that we should have stood up to the judiciary and stood up to the lawsuit that was set up in federal court, rather than actually trying to force us or let them force us into an unequitable position for Kansas by having to rob the highway fund to do that. So it's just as simple as that, in my opinion.
Representative Sloan.
Thank you. And I have voted against borrowing or not paying our bills. When you defer the state contribution to the state employee retirement plan and there's no expectation that there'll be additional state revenues, that's not good planning. That's not good management. In some ways, I think we're rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. It's more than just the need to fund education. I mentioned earlier, we're not funding mental health programs, either at the hospital level or in our communities. We are taking money from the Transitional Assistance for Needy Families, a program that helps folks most at risk. We're taking money from parents as teachers. We have not provided a pay increase for state employees for 8, I think going on 9 years. At some point, you have to notice that state employees are leaving. for better opportunities. And so the services that they delivered either are delayed or don't occur at all. We also have, the higher education funding being reduced. Now, that results in higher tuition, which makes affordable education more difficult for our families and their children. The bond ratings by the Moody's and the other services have been downgraded because of our financial shenanigans. That raises the cost of any borrowing we do.
Mr. Carlskin.
Thank you. Regarding the transportation fund being rated, when T-Works was passed back in, I think it was 2010, there was a commitment made by the legislature to the citizens of Kansas. Kansas has we rank 4th in the number of miles, of highway miles across the United States. We've taken in excess, or the Brownback administration has taken in excess of over $2 billion, in recent years from transportation. We're borrowing on money that they're going to get. That's like you and I going out and taking out a credit card to pay off a credit card. That's just irresponsible, management of money. But it's also a safety issue. In the past, there's been 1,200 miles of roads repaired or replaced per year. We're down to 200 miles of roads being worked on. The issue is it's safety, it's irresponsible management of the resources that we have. It's been mentioned by the other people here at this panel about equity and what we're hurting, but we're hurting ourselves. And the frustrating part of it is there's no plan in place to deal with this from my opponent or the Brownback administration.
For this next question, we'll start with Representative Ballard. Do you favor Medicaid expansion in the state? Why or why not? Each candidate gets 90 seconds.
Yes, I do. I do favor Medicaid expansion. We've had that vote come up on the floor, but we've almost like from an amendment because they don't want to run it as a bill, though there have been bills written for it. And we've had it as an amendment, and then they'll find it non-germane. So in other words, we can't vote on it. We have tried many times. But Medicaid expansion, if we had done it when we were supposed to, we would have had about $1 billion in this state. And we just didn't take advantage of it. We could have set up our own exchanges, so we could have tapered it exactly to how we needed it in Kansas to meet our population of people. But we didn't do that. For 3 years, we could have had 100% of it. Then after that, it would have gone to 90%. But we chose not to do that. That is taking, because you don't like a policy, or because you don't like the president who made the policy, or the people who voted for it, does not mean that your people in your state should suffer as a result of that. And we're talking about a lot of people that are being affected by not expanding Medicaid. And we could do that easily. You don't have to call it that. You can call it something else. Kentucky did. You can still do that. But why have other people suffer for what we will not do in the process? It will also save hospitals. Because as a result of that, the one in Independence had to close. And Lawrence Memorial was able to absorb it a little bit because we have larger resources and we can do it. But smaller hospitals do not have that. So the Medicaid expansion, we wouldn't have to go. Okay, we wouldn't have to go to what I would call reducing the reimbursements that goes for doctors and hospitals, and we're going to give them 4% less. Medicaid expansion would have helped.
Mr. Pierce.
Wrong to stand on the wheelchairs of sick people to try to to expand your government programs, to try to expand regulation into healthcare in Kansas. I don't think that we would end up with $1 billion. We would have ended up further in debt because what it would set up is an exchange that Kansas would have been having to pay for now, and we would have been worse in debt than we are right now. I think that the strings that are attached to Medicaid and expanding that are far too egregious for Kansas or for any Kansan to have to deal with. I believe that whenever we're dealing with the Affordable Care Act as it is, it unduly fiscally burdens each state that enacts it. So I believe we were right to defy its expansion. also, I believe that isn't Medicaid something that can actually be used to forfeit or get a house forfeited from somebody, or take somebody's property in escrow if they can't afford to pay for the Medicaid for the insurance? That's kind of civil asset forfeiture, with taking somebody at the worst possible time in their life and actually giving them the shaft at the time whenever they really need their revenue. I believe that a free market solution would be actually better in this solution than anything that the federal or the state government could provide.
Representative Sloan.
Thank you. When I was chairman of the Vision 2020 Committee last year, we held 4 weeks of hearings on Medicaid expansion, and we introduced the only comprehensive bill that showed up in the Kansas legislature. It provided that the state would not be making the 10% commitment, financial commitment required under the Affordable Care Act, but that the beneficiaries, the healthcare beneficiaries, would make that contribution on our behalf. Hospital Association agreed to it. The EMS people agreed to it. You know, the healthcare providers understood that if you can make 90%, it's better than making nothing in order to expand the healthcare coverage to 160,000 other Kansans. As was mentioned, the Independence Hospital closed largely because of the Medicaid reimbursement not being there. Via Christi in Wichita has laid off employees. St. Francis Hospital in Topeka is now on the market. They're trying to sell it. Again, they keep saying because of non-Medicaid expansion. And I would point out that under the existing Medicaid program, reimbursement to pharmacists for the medications is now below the cost to the pharmacist. You can't continue to have businesses support their customers and not have recovery of those investments, those costs. So yes, I support Medicaid expansion.
All right. Mr. Colskin.
Thank you. Regarding Medicaid expansion, it's been said by the other individuals on this panel that it could work and it could save. We would not have to make that 10% commitment. Indiana, there's other states that have done it, and I think it's a good plan to look at. We've got Kansans that are hurting. I worked in Independence for 14 years. I'm very familiar with, and I know a lot of people that lost their jobs down there when they closed the hospital. As was indicated, there are several other hospitals that are in trouble in the state of Kansas that are looking at either being sold or going out of business. And the bottom line is, it's hurting people that need the help. Do I agree totally with the Obamacare legislation? No. But I feel strongly that we need to help those most vulnerable Kansans, and I think by doing so, there's a way that it can be done. As Mr. Sloan indicated, many people agreed to it. We could get it happening, and we wouldn't be hurting as many Kansans.
Mr. Davis.
I would absolutely expand Medicaid. I'd also like to point out that beginning in 2017, under the Affordable Care Act, states can apply for innovation waivers. And so if Kansas is truly concerned about having our own control, we can build our own system the way we want. What is not working right now is our disastrous privatized system. CanCare has just recently misestimated the number of patients in the backlog by a factor of 5. And for that, the state fined them $750,000, which I'm sure was a great comfort to those 15,000 patients that still haven't received care. I do believe that there will be some financial issues. It's not completely 100% covered, but the gains far outweigh the costs, especially when we're talking about Kansas taxpayer money coming back to Kansas.
This next question starts with Mr. Pierce. What initiatives would you be willing to support to stimulate job growth in Kansas? Each of you have 90 seconds.
I would be willing to support initiatives that are cooperative between businesses and the state government to understand that businesses are the ones that create jobs, and the state government are the ones that should get out of the way the best as possible. I believe that job creation is best in the private sector whenever it is possible, because as some of the people on this panel have said, the people who are leaving the government jobs know that the private sector is better in Kansas now to be in, rather than actually being in the public sector, and I think that's a good thing. So I would actually encourage more private sector and more independent jobs, and more jobs that are created by new businesses or by people who are starting their new ventures. I believe capitalism works in this situation, and I believe that any sort of program that we come up with should actually reflect the fact that people should have ownership of their own lives and should actually go forth with their own self-determination and radical self-individualism at play. You can actually make a lot of money in the state of Kansas if you want to, and I think we should encourage that.
Representative Sloan.
I would start by reinstituting the Kansas Bioscience Authority that was recently sold. That was a classic example of a partnership between private and public sector entities creating jobs by helping local companies expand and grow. Several Lawrence companies benefited from that. I would expand that concept to renewable energy and to information technology, sort of the advanced guard of where we need to be moving as a society, and certainly in Kansas. You know, I have brought, as I said, federal agency heads to Kansas to meet with our people. It appears that we're now going to have, for the first time outside one of the coasts of this country, a Federal Communications Commission conference workshop on internet security, and it'll be held at KU later this fall. I've brought in the people from the Department of Energy and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and they have talked about expanding the internet, or the transmission, and I apologize for the call, the high voltage transmission lines necessary to move renewable energy out. Both of those create jobs in our state, and they're the type of jobs that we want.
Mr. Carlskin.
Thank you. I think to encourage private business to come to Kansas, we need to have a stable taxing policy, a stable state. You know, we're losing people. There's more people leaving Kansas than there are people coming into Kansas. This is not a pro job growth scenario for the private sector to come in. You know, we need to straighten out the mess that we're in right now before we can encourage people. It was in the Kansas City paper, I think a week or two ago, and it hit the internet, about a person was leaving, had to do with healthcare, was just so frustrated with Kansas about what was going on, he's going over into Missouri. And because of the fact that he referred to Kansas as just basically a big joke, that he was ashamed of being in Kansas. We need to get our house in order to start bringing people in that want to be here.
Mr. Davis.
I agree with Jim on this, actually. I believe that we need to fix our revenue crisis first. There is no part of employment that's not affected by that. Every time we rob KDOT, our roads get worse, and trucks have less interest in driving through our state. We lose tax revenue, and we lose trucking jobs. With healthcare, we haven't expanded Medicaid. Healthcare gets more expensive. Doctors leave. They want to get paid. Pharmacists certainly want to get paid. And in terms of bringing in new businesses, one of the big concerns in the 21st century is having properly educated employees. And if our education system is not up to snuff, companies that build facilities here will not have properly trained employees, and they're going to go to the states with the best education, the best roads, and the best health care.
Representative Ballard.
Thank you. I would agree. We need to fix our revenue, and we can do that. We could do that and pick up over $260 million. You have to go a whole year cycle before you could get it, but you could do that. So that's one way we could do it. The other thing is K through 12. Whenever anyone that I know of comes to Kansas and they're being recruited to look at a job or something, the first question they ask is, how are the schools here? How are the schools here? And it's up to us to make sure that K through 12 are good schools, because that's extremely important to people for their children to have it. And then they get to college eventually. But right now they're worried about the K through 12 and what happens. The bioscience one, I really want to hit that one again, because you know, there was a major conflict going on between the management and the state and everything else, and they decided we didn't need it. But we did need to have it. There were 2 legislators that started that program, and that Bioscience Authority was creating those jobs. It was having new people come into the state. We still have a contract with them because we have money committed to a lot of those people already, but we'll pay that out and then we'll no longer have it. But that's valuable to us as a state, but it's also had national attraction, which is what we need to have for research dollars. And the renewable energy, we have wind. We have wind. And now we decide we don't really want to use it as much or protect it. Well, we don't have the huge tourism that other people have, but we do have a trade, and it's wind, and it makes money for us, it makes electricity for us, and we refuse. And now after I said tourism, we could do a little bit around tourism, because there's parts of Kansas that are really nice that people could take weekend tours.
We'll move on to the next question. For this one, we'll start off with Representative Sloan. What do you think is the most underserved population in Kansas, and what's the best way to provide for this population? You each have 90 seconds.
Very interesting question. I'm not sure that there is a unique or single underserved population. Certainly, as I mentioned earlier, programs that help senior citizens or people with disabilities to stay in their homes are important. It's a lot less expensive to be supporting people in their homes than it is to move and pay for them to be in adult care facility or nursing homes. The pre-kindergarten programs are important in terms of preparing our youngest students for the academics of kindergarten through, KU. The inability to support higher education by the state means that there are fewer Kansas graduates of high school who can afford to go to college. And college, as we all know, opens economic and other doors for a lifetime. The agricultural sector, the industrial sector, all would benefit from a responsible tax policy in which we are then investing in those sectors, be it to maintain the roads or to do job training and retraining programs. So I don't believe that there is a true or a unique underserved population, but it is a broad category of opportunities.
Mr. Kroskin.
Thank you. I'll have to say, I think the most underserved population, and this comes from more of a personal standpoint because of my background in education. I left the superintendency in Holton in 2010. Since that time, I've been working with underperforming schools in school districts across the state. And poor kids are being hurt right now because of the block grant that was chosen to be put in place by the Brown Back administration. There was to be a new funding formula put in place. That hasn't taken place, and I think it was supposed to take a couple years. But I've worked in schools for the past 6 years working with kids that are bilingual or non-English speaking. They are in poverty. They are of color. Those kids need help, and unfortunately, because of the block grant, each school district gets what they want. Kids that are coming into school are not ready to enter school, and they are being underserved. I think we need to have a funding formula in education to help the kids that need it the most. Most of us here in Lawrence, in this area, we're blessed with great schools. And we do have good schools in Kansas, but we've got kids that come to school that aren't ready to learn. and we're hurting those kids.
Again, I agree with Tom that this is rough for a lot of people in Kansas right now, but one I think that is particularly underserved is those with mental illnesses. We have fewer facilities, we have less funding, and we have more people with mental illnesses ending up on the streets or in prisons. And we are still paying to take care of them in different ways. Certainly, better mental health care means less recidivism and less people in prison who could be treated. And I find that just from a personal standpoint that this is something that is particularly inhumane. I really feel like if we take our job seriously and care about our neighbors, then we should take action on this immediately.
I would agree we have a lot of populations and they all need help. But I would also have to just point to rural areas, I think in many ways is suffering because they don't have all the things that urban have. And often in the legislature, it's a rural or urban fight that's going on. So I think we need to look at the rural areas because their schools are often their community activities and everything else. So I would have to say a little bit about the rural areas in that instance. I would have to hit mental health again pretty hard. Because, you know, the mental health community centers were created by the legislature. We established those. I mean, it was established before I was elected, but we established those. And you have to accept everyone who comes in. As a result of that, they have a lot of bad debt. And so, but they're providing those services. We don't have enough services. You ask the sheriff in town about the jails. We're housing them there. So we'll have to look at the mental health treatments. The hospital closed their wing. A lot of hospitals closed their wing. So we can't provide those services for people. So we have to look at that. And then intellectual and developmental disabilities. You know, I'm looking at that in terms of, you know, we didn't have to combine them in CanCare. We did not have to combine them, but we did combine them. They were doing well by themselves. Now they're hurting. I'm on the board for Cottonwood. I'm on the board for Burt Nash Mental Health. So I know about the mental health. I know about the intellectual and developmental disabilities. And we are creating all these problems with losing money all the time. You take money from them, how do they provide the services? That's what I think is underserved, and that's what we have to do better.
Well, I'm not going to play the oppression Olympics game whenever it comes to this because I believe that a person who is in the rural area would feel underserved because they don't have access to certain programs in school, but the person in the urban area would probably feel underserved because they don't have access to land. I believe that the only person who's truly oppressed in society is the individual. And I think that anything you can do to agnostic of any identity crisis that you have, or identity or identities or whatever you have, that can help support the individual are the best thing that you can do in the world. Because I believe that if you're supporting an individual's desires to maybe start a business or maybe go to college and become a doctor or maybe actually help the mental health issue or situation in Kansas by creating a private practice in which they can perform pro bono work. I think that anything you can do to help them and equip them to go in life is best. So I would probably say that just basically the most underserved person in Kansas is the Kansas Dreamer.
We'll next go to questions from the audience, and this is one that I received. Leaders in Topeka complain about federal overreach from Washington, D.C., but they simultaneously engage in gubernatorial overreach throughout Kansas communities from their offices in Kansas. How would you respond to this? Mr. Carl Skint, we'll start with you. Each person has 60 seconds.
Could you, the question is, how would I respond to the gubernatorial, government overreach that comes into play as to weak citizens? Is that correct?
Gubernatorial overreach throughout Kansas communities from their offices in Kansas.
I'll try to address what I think the question is, and that is the overreach that's taking place by the government to we citizens, is that the overreach is the neglect on the part of government, of state government, mainly the Brownback administration, in not doing what they need to do to take care of the situation in Kansas, whether it be through funding of schools, through taking money from transportation, and not taking care of the roads the way they need to, plugging holes in the budget. And that's falling on we, other Kansans, in the form of personal property taxes, increased sales taxes. That's where I think the overreach is coming, in my opinion.
Mr. Davis.
I believe that city and county governments are the bedrock of Kansas politics, and that's so true here in Douglas County and in Lawrence in particular, where we are extremely active on that front, and we are extremely frustrated because we don't feel that we're properly represented in the State House. Just because the State House has the majority doesn't mean that they have that it's appropriate for them to sort of punish Lawrence the way they have. We've seen measures specifically as designed to attack issues that have come up in Lawrence, from fair housing to health to the property tax lid. And these are all things that don't affect most Kansans, but are sort of a mean-spirited way to come after Lawrence. And I think that Lawrence needs better advocates who can really put a stop to this in terms of just sheer overreach over local government. So.
Representative Ballard.
I'm interpreting that question to mean, don't give us so many unfunded mandates. And I think that's what it was saying to me, that we don't like when the federal government says we must do this and this and this, but we do this and we pass it on down to the county commission and how it affects our city as well. I think that is an issue, and we need to take control of that, because local control is extremely important. We always talk about local control. Whatever we would pass here, we should go by our own ordinance and what we do here, and every community should be able to govern itself. And once in a while, the state jumps in and decides, no, everybody is going to do this. Well, that doesn't fit our population. You know, in fact, when it comes up, I've been to the floor and I've debated it, in fact, and we've gone through all of this and we talk about it, and we'll say, now, is it aimed at us? And I offer an amendment and they'll say, well, no, it's not, but then they won't pass the amendment. Well, if it wasn't aimed at us and the amendment had us in it, it must have been aimed that way. So in many ways, it's the majority, and the majority rules, but we can always speak on our behalf, and all of us from Douglas County do that.
For once, I actually agree with Barbara Ballard on something. I believe that if the government is overreaching in our communities from Washington D.C. or Topeka, it's on our communities to actually rise up and say that this might not be a good mandate for us, or might not be something that it works for Lawrence or for Douglas County. So I believe that. Secondly, I believe that by not doing something, I don't think that that's necessarily overreach or neglect. I believe that the best government is the government that governs least. And by removing regulations on stuff on Lawrence and removing mandates that come from on high, you're doing a good job for people. So I think that by liberating us from those mandates, we're actually doing a service for the individual who I care the most about.
Representative Sloan.
Thank you. I believe the best government is the one that's closest to the citizens. And so I have consistently voted against placing restrictions on municipal, county, school district, governing bodies, because they are the ones who are actually dealing with the revenue the problems or opportunities, the local public desires like inspections for housing, adequacy and such. But I also take this in a different direction. I truly believe that we need to have an independent judiciary, and that all the efforts to restrict or punish the judges and the courts for making the Constitution work, where you have an executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch, and they all are checks and balances against the overreach of the other. So I think that part of this mandate is to protect our court system.
We'll go to another audience question, and we'll start with Mr. Davis. What is the financial burden of illegal immigration on medical costs, the correction system, and the social safety net in Kansas? Each person gets 60 seconds to respond.
I'll be honest, I can't speak to the direct effects in Kansas, but I would also encourage people to think about the positive effects that those individuals have as well. I honestly don't have numbers in front of me, though, and I apologize for that.
Representative Ballard?
I'm not sure we have numbers on that because, well, I just don't think we have numbers on it. But what I would say is that, you know, immigrants, that's interesting when I think about it. Immigrants, depending on who they work for, they take money out of their paychecks. And they have Social Security numbers. We don't know exactly where those Social Security numbers come from, but they are paying their way. Somebody is employing them in many ways. So when I'm looking at it, I'm really worried about people who work in our state. Someone is employing them. Someone is employing them. They're supposed to be checking to see if they are legal. And in some cases, they come up with Social Security numbers for them, whether they get those Social Security numbers from. So if you're going to talk about the immigrants coming in, you have to talk about the people that are hiring them in the process, or they wouldn't have a job. So I'm not sure where those figures might be. But emergency rooms can't turn away emergencies. That's a federal regulation. How do we find those numbers? I don't know. But what I want to leave with whoever asks that question is that they have to be working for someone, they are hiring them, and they're responsible to find out if they are citizens or not.
Mr. Pierce?
With a prepared response to this, but I will say that if that ideally we should have numbers on that, and if the numbers come out positive, I think that it's that if it's even positive to $1, it's too many dollars for American Kansans to be paying for illegal immigration and everything. I will preface that, or I will follow that by saying that I value by a long shot people who legally immigrate to this nation and actually prove themselves worthy of becoming Americans, and who become Americans, because I believe that we are a nation of legal immigrants, and I think that if we aren't upholding the law in that regard, we aren't a nation of laws anymore. And I think that we need to uphold the law and protect the privilege that legal immigration gives us, and the luxury of new citizens from around the world. So thank you so much.
Senator Sloan?
I don't know how many supposed illegal immigrants there are in Kansas. I do know that the legislature has struggled with this issue in terms of should the children have in-state tuition at the higher education institutions. And I have supported that. Because if a child is carried here and goes, in the arms of the parents, and then goes through our high schools and graduates and wants to go on to higher education, those are people who are going to commit to us economically, politically, socially. In terms of expenses for health care and education and prison, I mean, as was pointed out, immigration is a federal issue. Most times, if we convict someone who is an illegal immigrant of committing crimes, they're then deported by the federal government. But we do not want sick people in our society. They need to have access to health care. We do not want uneducated people here. They need to be able to be productive. And as Representative Ballard pointed out, we need to have the employers of these people found as well.
Mr. Kroskin?
Thank you. Like the others on this panel, I don't have any idea of the numbers as far as what it's costing the state. As I said earlier, in the last 6 years, I've worked with a lot of lower performing schools. And in those schools, there are children of illegals that are going to school. You wouldn't know them from another child. And I'll have to say that the teachers that I've worked with, the administrators I've worked with, they work hard to try to educate those kids just like any other child in their classroom. I think they have the right to learn. But as was mentioned, I think it's the responsibility of the federal government to have a better policy with respect to that, but also with the people that are employing the illegals, they need to be dealt with as well.
For this next question, you each get 30 seconds, and we'll start with Representative Ballard. Will you make a pledge that if elected, you will attend all legislative sessions and votes?
Oh, would I make a pledge? No. I will tell you, my record is good. I'm there all the time. When I'm not there is either, I might be sick or I'm out of town, or an instance where my sister died. So for me to make that pledge and say, I'm not going to miss it because my sister died or she's sick and I'm going to see it, you're not going to see a pledge from me. So I would say, am I there? Almost 100% of the time, yes. If I'm not there, it's an emergency, or I'm going for a legislative function of which the legislature has appointed me to go.
Barring a medical emergency or other issue, I would make that pledge 7 days a week and twice on Sunday. So I would pledge it on a Bible too. So yes, I will attend all legislative sessions that I am required to.
Representative Sloan?
No, I will not make that pledge. I have had several illnesses over the years I've served and have caused me to miss. More importantly, I am on several advisory committees on telecommunications, energy, water, healthcare, and environment. And I believe it's important that I represent our state and our community in those committees as well as being in Topeka. I am in Topeka most of the time, and I am voting every time I'm there.
Mr. Carl-Skent?
Thank you. To make a pledge, I will not make a pledge, but I would assure my constituents that I'll be there in session every time that's possible. Illness, emergencies come up. It happens to all of us, but I would be there as much as possible.
Mr. Davis?
No, I cannot predict the future, but I absolutely will be present as much as possible. And if there's a vote that is important to the people of Lawrence, I will do everything I can to be there.
All right. For this next question, we'll start with Mr. Pierce, and it's, which legislative committees would you like to serve on and why? Each of you get 90 seconds to answer.
I would like to serve on trade, tourism, transportation, mainly because I think that trade is one of the best things that we can do in Kansas because as far as I know, we don't really grow very good bananas or potatoes, and we need Florida or Idaho for that. So I believe that would be something interesting. Transportation, because I'm obsessed with automobiles, and I think I would like to add my perspective about infrastructure additions and infrastructure maintenance to those committees. And I would also like to be in tourism because I love my state, and I believe that if elected, I would be one of the best people to actually convince people that this is a fantastic place to tour.
Representative Sloan?
Thank you. I would want to be back on energy because the development of our renewable resources is economically as well as environmentally important to our state. I would want to be on agriculture again because that's the committee that takes up the water issues, and the water quality and sustainability are going to make a bigger difference in the state's future than anything else, even more than education, because if we don't have enough water, no one lives here. And the third would be the Vision 2020 committee. That's, if the legislature can be said to have a long-range planning committee, that has been it. I mentioned earlier that we spent 4 weeks under my leadership looking at Medicaid expansion. We spent time looking at IT security. The state has some major weaknesses there. We've pointed out some steps that could be taken to correct them. I think some of them are going to be. So I'm interested in the long-range planning issues as well as those that deal with the immediate problems of water sustainability and our energy availability.
Mr. Carlskent.
Thank you. I think as the audience probably knows by now, my hot button is education, and I would like to serve on education, especially in the area of finance. And with the funding that's in flux right now, I feel like the new formula for funding of education is essential. I have a background as superintendent of schools working in school finance. I'm also an adjunct professor for Baker University, and I teach school finance. So that would be an area that I would have a certain interest in, as well as agriculture, because I grew up on a farm. I've served in several rural areas in my career, and I feel like I have the pulse of agriculture. So those would be areas that I would feel comfortable in.
So as a mathematician, I'm usually interested in the things that other people find pretty boring. So my number one is actually rules and journal. I believe that we need to make the rules of the House more democratic, including choosing chairmanships for committees from within the committee rather than having them all be appointed by one person, speaker. I also would like to see some measure of independence from the speaker and other matters. We've seen a lot of abuses on that front. I also would support being on the elections committee. I think it's important to address so many of the issues that we have right now in terms of voter registration and these lawsuits. I think we can stop wasting money enforcing the laws if we'll just fix them. And then finally, federal and state affairs, because I love the Constitution of Kansas and of the United States, and I just am fascinated by that. So that's something I think I could offer a very interesting opinion to that committee. So.
Representative Ballard.
Thank you. I would like to stay on the committees I'm on now, the appropriations. There's 23 people, and we get to work on the state budget, and we get to hear everything from every committee about everything. So I would like to. It took me a while to get on it, and I would like to keep it. So appropriations, social services budget. Social services budget is big. It takes 20% of the state budget. And I'm the ranking member on that. And we're dealing with Children's Initiative Fund, the Guardian, the CanCare dilemma, children and families, all of those issues that I would like to have a little more control over. And being a ranking member, and especially with the chair we have now, and I'm hoping he gets to get it back too, we've been able to work together really closely on that committee. Transportation, you've heard a lot about transportation and where the money is going, and it's an exciting committee to be on, but it's also, you learn a lot about your state, especially roads and bridges and how important they are. Then the CanCare Oversight Committee. When CanCare was first established in 2013, it did not have an oversight committee. We had another committee that put that in, and I'm on that one. So we get to look at them and ask them questions about the 3 private vendors and what we need to do and keep them honest. They keep us honest, we monitor them. Okay, and so that I would like to. And then Midwest Higher Education Compact that deals with all of the higher education, 12 states belong to it. So I would like to stay on those committees and do what I've done before, and that is to try to get the funding, try to be fair, and try to take care of the most vulnerable people that we have in this state.
The next viewer question, we'll start with Representative Sloan. What restrictions, if any, should the state of Kansas place on abortion? 60 seconds for the response.
I believe that abortion is a terrible form of birth control, but at the same time, the Supreme Court has ruled in Roe v. Wade and in other decisions what the law of this land is. And so I support the Supreme Court decisions.
Mr. Carlskent.
Thank you. I am pro-life. I disagree with the decisions that have been made by Roe v. Wade and some of the others. I'm not in favor of abortion, period.
Ultimately, I believe that abortion is a medical matter, and I think it should be up to patients and doctors rather than politicians and pundits. So.
Representative Ballard.
And I would say it's the law. And people try to find ways to get around the law. It's the law. The restrictions that we have in Kansas, you know, we can live with them. But I believe it's a woman's right to choose. And if she chooses that, and she has made her decision with it, and the law supports it, it's her choice. And I would support her choice.
I'm endorsed by Kansas for Life. I'm actually running on a very pro-life platform. I believe that abortion is an evil, and if you believe it's a very poor form of birth control, then you should make it illegal and should fight everything that Roe v. Wade has put on our society. I am vehemently pro-life.
I think that's everyone, right? All right, this next question, we'll start with Mr. Carlskin. If you are representing a minority viewpoint in the legislature, how would you work with the majority to promote effective change? 60 seconds.
How would I promote effective change? I think having been, you know, in a background of working with school boards and working with teachers associations in my career, I think first of all you have to listen and you have to be willing to give and take. There's so many instances where we see it at the federal level, where we see it at the state level, that no one wants to give an inch. And I think we have to be willing to say, okay, I understand your point. This is what I can go with. This is what I can't go with. The bottom line is we need each other to be able to accomplish. Now, will we get everything? No, but we need to we need to be at least listening and willing to compromise.
As a Democrat in Kansas, I will be very prepared to be a minority. I think that the thing that would be most important to me is forging relationships with other representatives. Most of the frustration right now, I believe, is with the leadership, and most of the Republican leadership have essentially run away for the next year. And when we come back in 2017, I think that will give us an opportunity to build a new coalition and to have that moderate majority again.
Representative Ballard.
I think it's important to build relationships, of which I have, which we call reaching across the aisle. And we get to know each other quite well. And we're able, especially with moderate Republicans and Democrats, we've been able to combine. One of the biggest things that I'm really proud of this year was that we did not allow the governors to change the way Supreme Court justices are chosen. And that was a coalition where we worked together. Right now, we have a merit system of which they do all the vetting and everything else, and then they send 3 names to the governor, and he can choose between those 3. If you do that, you have the appeals that the governor would have, you have the Supreme Court. So that was an effort we worked out between the moderates and the Democrats, and we're able to do that. There's a lot of other issues we work together on in order to stop things that would really not be good for Kansans along those lines. You know, the other thing is if you're a minority, you sort of know that you're not going to run the show. The majority runs the show. Well, then you learn to work with the majority so that they will cut you a little slack and you're able to get what it is that you want. So I'm good. I'm good at doing that because I have rights too.
If I'm in the minority position and I know my position is reasonable, there are many different options. I believe you can forge a relationship with people and actually try to convince people on an individual legislator by individual legislator basis and move your way. I might go by the 12 Angry Men style, referencing a film of negotiation whenever it comes to that. But I also believe that I don't back down on my principles whenever I am in a minority position ever. If I'm right, you're right 100% wherever you are. So I believe that I would stick by my guns and stay firm on those.
Representative Sloan.
You build relationships based on common interests, but also in terms of your credibility, and that's based on your knowledge of the subject matter, your knowledge of the legislative process. And so it makes a difference if you have been there a while and if your colleagues recognize that what you say has basis in facts. So the process that I use is I try and educate them on the issue, the long and short-term implications and consequences or opportunities, the relevance to the state and to individuals, including the other legislators, and a willingness to compromise. I recognize that while my ideas may be the right ones for our state, they probably have to be captured or achieved incrementally as you bring along the people, and as I learn that, that modifications may be necessary.
All right, let's see. This question, 60 seconds. We'll start with Mr. Davis. What adjustments, if any, would you make to the laws that allow concealed carry in public buildings?
First of all, I would like to see local control over that regained. There's no reason for the federal government to prevent municipalities from having control over that. I would also just like to see the licensure restored. I think we had a model system a few years ago. I think this new system, this so-called constitutional carry, benefits just a handful of unscrupulous gun salesmen. And apart from that, I guess I would just say that the local government aspect is critical in a place like Lawrence, where this is such a hot button issue right now, and we're very passionate about it. I believe we should have that local authority.
Representative Ballard?
Thank you. That was a majority decision. We just talked a little bit about the minority and the majority. That was a majority decision. I voted against it. I didn't think we needed it, but we have it, and each year we strengthen it as we have gone along. The one that I'm most concerned about is I would like to exempt higher education, because July 1st, 2017, all of our universities all around the states will have to allow concealed carry. And I just don't think we need to have guns with classrooms and professors and everything else on campus, and we can't secure it because we have too many entrances to our buildings. If I had my druthers, I'd like to say, don't bring them into mental health community centers. Because right now they can't. I mean, they would be. So I would say community centers and higher education. In fact, I have a bill, and I introduced it last year, waiting for them. And I will have it again in January to exempt higher education out of it.
Jared?
I personally support concealed and constitutional carry, and I believe that if you're so concerned about people's security, allow them to secure themselves and allow them to defend themselves wherever they are. On this panel, there was a Supreme Court decision that was being referred to as a law. Well, the Constitution of the United States has the Second Amendment in it, and I believe that is the ultimate law of the land, not the Supreme Court decision in this regard. I believe that the right to defend oneself and to bear arms does refer to your ability to defend yourself all around the nation, all around this nation, and in every place you can. I don't believe it's as much of an issue as you think it would be, because in reality, you would never know who is and who isn't. And I think that if you don't know, that won't make a difference to your day-to-day life. I can see no difference in day-to-day life in this state or in this community with constitutional carry or without it. And I don't understand the issues with that.
Mr. Sloan?
As I said earlier, I believe that the best government is the one that's closest to the people that it's serving. And so I voted I voted for concealed carry originally. I still support that. Honest, law-abiding citizens with proper training should be able to carry a weapon. At the same time, I have voted against restrictions on local governments, educational institutions, the courts, because I believe that those leaders, most of whom are elected or appointed, should be determining what's best with their constituencies. And so, again, I think that the key issue, though, is if you're going to have concealed carry under any circumstances, those people should be trained to safely handle the weapon and to understand what the laws are about when you can and cannot use a weapon.
Mr. Carlson.
Thank you. Like many others on the panel, I feel local control is something that needs to be taken into account here. I'm not opposed to conceal and carry, but I do feel like that the safety is a huge issue. That, you know, I want to see people that are conceal and carry know how to use those weapons, that know what they're doing. They're checked, not just a blanket say, well, anybody can carry one because it's a constitutional right. I think you have a responsibility, and I think we have a responsibility to let that be at the local control and make those decisions, whether it be in our schools and where in our communities.
And this is the last question. We'll start with Representative Ballard. What is your experience with analyzing budgets? You each have 60 seconds to respond.
Thank you. Well, a lot of experience analyzing budgets. We've made a lot of state budgets. And as I said earlier, it's anywhere from transportation to corrections to juvenile justice, education. And it's making all the recommendations and going through them, and, you know, and the painful part is the cuts, you know, or what didn't make it. But you still defend it and try to explain it. And with social services, if I'm going into appropriations and we're talking about it, we justify why we allowed the budgets to stay the way they were submitted to the governor or the way the governor has it in their budget as well. And sometimes, you know, you have to count on your colleagues, and you have to make the best argument you can to get them to support not taking it out but leaving it in. So as far as the compromising and the negotiating with them and what the budget is and informing them about what this budget does, do you know when you cut it what you are cutting? And sometimes they don't, so you make sure they know if they do this, they're cutting it. So I have lots of experience on budgets.
Mr. Pierce.
I have lots of experience with dealing with corporate and individual budgeting, but I believe that somebody with a new, fresh perspective is always useful whenever it comes to things that might be invisible to those who have looked at them for years and have years of experience. Because I believe new ideas and new takes on budgetary issues could be a very welcome thing for Kansas and a very welcome thing for Lawrence and Douglas County. I'm confident in my ability to analyze a budget, considering that it would be kind of a new experience for me. But I'm definitely up for the challenge.
Mr. Slum.
The legislature gets one budget bill. Every agency is in that budget. So when I'm analyzing it agency by agency, program by program, but then I'm also looking at, all right, I may like what is in one agency's budget or program, but not the funding level of another. So I'm constantly having to balance the overall benefit to Kansans and the harm that may be occurring to them. So I've got 20 plus years of legislative experience doing that, but I've also served on local boards in our community and have analyzed smaller budgets. But at the state level, we're looking at one document that lists every program, every agency. And so you're analyzing them in comparison with every other program and agency and casting a vote in terms of what's the best interest overall.
Mr. Carlson.
Thank you. Having never been a legislature, I don't understand I don't know the full scope of what a state budget, entails. I have a lot of experience in working with budget as a superintendent of schools, dealing with deficit spending, dealing with deficit budgets, working with whether it be teachers, whether it be school board, on working on compromise and making decisions on where we have to cut. Going through the recession of 2007 and 2008, there was a lot of deficits that we had to deal with back in those days, and I have that experience. I know what it's the give and take of a budget. I'm familiar with that. But on the full scope of a state, that would be something that would be relatively new to me.
Most of my budget experience comes from my personal life, my career as a freelance writer and editor. In terms of the budget at the State House, in terms of the administration, I don't think that they have a very good understanding at all of how it should work. Things I've learned in my personal life, for instance, are, have a safety net, take care of your health, things that they don't seem to be able to handle. But in that capacity, I do think that income is the most important thing, and until we address the revenue, we will just be grasping at straws with the budget.
I think that's going to do it. Thanks for joining the Voter Education Coalition in WOW 6 for our primary forum. The primary election is set for August 2nd. The general election will be held November 8th. A special thanks to all the candidates for joining us. Have a great night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.